Broken are Babak's arms, his homeland set aflame, yet still his gaze is lifted high, cutting across the sky. O comrades, rise, take up the fight, let not the foe profane this land. With my fierce and fallen arms, strike, clash, endure. Though I am gone, my strength is yours. So wrote Azerbaijani poet Ali Kerim in 1969. His poem, The Arms of Babak, is one of the multiple examples of how the enduring legend of the Khurramites inspires generations of artists and revolutionaries. Hello friends, this is Echoes of Heresy, and we continue our exploration of the Khurramites and the path of their leader, Babak Khorramdin.
I'm Andy Altshuler, and this is Echoes of Heresy, a podcast about spiritual descent and divergent beliefs across time and tradition.
The Khurramite rebellion was in fact one of the most durable uprisings against the Abbasid Caliphate, lasting over 2 decades in the rugged terrain of the northwestern Iran and southern Caucasus. Under Babak's command, Khurramite fighters established stronghold at Baz, a fortress nestled deep within the mountains. Nowadays the fortress is located in the territory of the Iran and Azerbaijan, not too far from the city of Ardabil. The fortress was protected by difficult passes and sympathetic villagers. This geography played a pivotal role in the military strategy of the Khurramites. The rebellion relied not on open field battle, but on guerrilla warfare, ambushes, raids, and sudden strikes against vulnerable Abbasid positions and supply routes. Khurramite fighters knew the land intimately and were often supported by local populations disaffected by Arab governance, taxation, and imposition of unfamiliar doctrines and rituals. The Khurramites' use of terrain, psychological tactics, and surprise made them particularly difficult to suppress. Abbasid forces suffered multiple humiliations, and the Caliphate's inability to quell the rebellion for so long became a political embarrassment. Babak reportedly defeated several successive governors and generals sent to pacify the region. His movement was not only militarily effective, it disrupted the idea of Abbasid invincibility, offering a potent symbol of Persian resistance and resilience. At-Tabari reports that at the height of Babak's military success, mass renouncement of Islam and conversions to Khurramism were taking place in towns and villages across Persia, even in regions far beyond the epicenter of the rebellion. Whether these accounts reflect the scale of actual conversions or were shaped by Abbasid anxieties about religious defection is open to interpretation, but they speak to the symbolic power Babak's movement projected across the Iranian world. Caliph al-Mamun initially underestimated the movement, distracted by theological controversies and unrest in other parts of the empire. It wasn't until al-Mutasim took power that the Caliphate launched a sustained, professional campaign to crush Babak. He appointed the experienced general Afshin, also known as Haydar ibn Qaus, an Iranian from Ushursana, in what is now modern Tajikistan. The general was familiar with local dynamics and skilled in mountain warfare. Afshin pursued a methodical campaign, cutting off supply lines, building alliances with Babak's rivals and laying siege to the Khurramite strongholds hidden in the rugged highlands. Despite the support Babak enjoyed among parts of the local populace, his quasi-state was far from the egalitarian utopia that later romantic commentators sometimes imagine. Where theological persuasion or messianic rhetoric failed to secure loyalty, more brutal methods were readily applied. Villages resistant to Khurramite control faced violence, forced conscription, and devastation, standard tools of medieval insurgency. Even within Babak's inner circle, suspicion could be deadly. Those perceived as disloyal faced torture, imprisonment, or execution. Over the long years of rebellion, grievances accumulated beneath the surface of Khurramite society, and Afshin was smart enough to exploit these fractures with precision, turning local resentments and internal divisions to his advantage. Eventually, Babak was betrayed, possibly by one of his own lieutenants or emerging rival Khurramite leaders. Some sources point to Armenian nobles who found themselves caught between a rock and a hard place, trying to navigate the dangerous waters between the fierce rebels and no less brutal, but perhaps more predictable and pragmatic empire. So Babak was captured and transported to the Abbasid court in Samarra. His execution in year 838 was not just a punishment, it was a political spectacle. At-Tabari offers a chillingly detailed description intended to send a message of absolute Abbasid triumph. Trigger warning. The following excerpt contains a historical description of execution from a 9th century source. It is included for educational purposes to illustrate how rulers used public punishment as political theater. If you'd prefer to skip this section, please jump ahead 30 seconds. Quote, "He was brought out, and his arms and legs were cut off. His flesh was then burned in front of him, while he remained silent, showing no signs of pain. He was then decapitated, and his head sent to Khorasan. His body was crucified at the gate of Samarra." End quote. At-Tabari, Tarikh al-Rusul wal-Muluk, History of Prophets and Kings, translated by Clifford Bosworth. This calculated cruelty was meant to unmake Babak's symbolic power, reducing a messianic figure to a defeated troublemaker. Yet in time, it only amplified his legend. After a strain of critical defeats, some prior to and some following Babak's capture and execution, many Khurramite survivors fled westward across the border into Byzantine territory. Rather than being treated as mere fugitives, they were welcomed by the Romans, partly for their military value, partly as a propaganda coup against the Abbasids. The Byzantines, always eager to exploit divisions within the Islamic world, recognized these experienced fighters as a bulwark against further Muslim expansion in the eastern frontier. Many of these Khurramites were settled in eastern Anatolia, where they were incorporated into the imperial military. Some formed semi-autonomous units, retaining elements of their internal hierarchy and martial culture. The most prominent episode in this story is the case of Theophobos, a Khurramite leader who entered Byzantine service and, according to Byzantine sources, converted to Christianity, though perhaps nominally. His original name was Nasr or Nusayr, according to the sources, though few modern scholars allege that Nasr and Theophobos are two separate men, namely father and his son. Theophobos commanded a significant force of Khurramite soldiers, and after baptism even married into the imperial family. His troops formed what may have been an elite unit under the Emperor Theophilus, playing a critical role in campaigns against the Abbasids in the late 830s. There were even rumors that Theophobos was seen by some of his followers as a messianic figure, a second Babak or a rightful king of a sort. Eventually, his ambitions and popularity led to his downfall. He was imprisoned and executed, but his story shows how religious dissenters could become imperial assets, at least temporarily. I am personally very interested whether Khurramite religious ideas did leave any imprint on Byzantine religious life. There is cautioned speculation among some curious minds that there may have been cross-pollination between Khurramite mysticism and marginal Byzantine sects, especially in the regions of eastern Anatolia where contact was sustained. The refugees may have formed closed communities, preserving rituals and cosmologies not easily absorbed into either Christianity or Islam. Unfortunately, direct textual or archaeological evidence is scarce. No known Byzantine theological writings explicitly describe Khurramite beliefs, and any transmission of doctrine would have been informal and unrecorded, if it occurred at all. In the end, the Khurramite role in Byzantium is clearer in the military-political domain than in the religious. They were rebels turned mercenaries, messianists turned frontier soldiers. Their memory, if not their theology, persisted in Byzantine fears of sectarian loyalties and imperial anxieties about internal treason cloaked in spiritual defiance. After the collapse of the rebellion, obviously not all Khurramites fled to the Byzantine Empire. Many were scattered across the Persianate world, likely absorbed into various tribal confederations among Iranic-speaking peoples. While they gradually dissolved as a distinct political force, it's plausible that they reinforced the heterodox currents within the region, particularly among unconventional Sufi orders and extreme and esoteric Shia sects. Interestingly, sects bearing the names Khurramiyya and Babakiyya are attested in Khorasan as late as the 12th and even 13th centuries. Sometimes they are also referred to as Muhammara in Arabic and Sorkh Jamagan in Persian. Both terms mean dressed in red. By that time, their beliefs and practices had likely evolved significantly, but the persistence of these names suggests a lingering legacy of Khurramite identity. The Mongol conquests, beginning in the early 13th century, profoundly disrupted the ethnic, linguistic, and religious landscape of Iran and Central Asia. In their wake, tracing the evolution of Khurramism or similar underground movements becomes exceedingly difficult, leaving their later history shrouded in speculation. Now let's have a look at the broader legacy and symbolism of the Khurramites. Though the Qizilbash movement emerged centuries after the fall of Babak Khorramdin, many scholars have noted symbolic and ideological resonances between the two. Certainly, there is no direct institutional continuity, but the spiritual and militant ethos of both movements invites comparison. The Qizilbash were known for their red headgear, Qizil meaning red in Turkic, and Bash, head, which became an emblem of sacred struggle and martyrdom. This recalls the Khurramite association with the color red, particularly under Babak, whose followers also emphasized sacrifice, resistance, and divine justice. Both groups elevated charismatic leaders to semi-divine or esoteric status. Babak was considered a mazhar, a manifestation of divine light or justice. This aligns with the Qizilbash veneration of Shah Ismail I and other Safavid leaders as embodiments of divine order, or veils of the divine presence. Militant religiosity, syncretic theology, and focus on mystical redemption through struggle define both traditions, placing them outside Sunni orthodoxy and within the broader spectrum of radical heterodoxy in Islamic history. During Safavid era, Babak's image made its way to folk tales and poetry, and was sometimes invoked alongside the examples of Shiite piety. These references sometimes even included speculation about Babak receiving instructions from Imam Reza himself, one of the most revered figures in Shia hagiographies. Babak's legacy in modern Iranian culture evolved through various ideological filters. During the Pahlavi era in the 20th century, he was recast as a proto-nationalist hero, a defender of Iranian culture and dignity in the face of Arab conquest. In many ways, this vision continues the narrative of Safavid and Qajar eras, but emphasizes the cultural, linguistic, and ethnic aspect rather than the religious one. Said Nafisi, a scholar and classic of modern Persian literature, wrote a historical novel about Babak, which is simply called Babak Khorramdin. Nafisi characterizes the hero of his book as a flame that refused to die, a cry for freedom, echoing across the centuries. Nafisi contextualizes Khurramites and other similar movements in his major non-fiction work, Social and Political History of Iran, first published in 1931. There he writes the following, quote, "Iran, after its defeat, did not accept subjugation. The soul of resistance continued to live through movements that, though defeated, preserved the pride and culture of this nation." End quote. Another historical novel about Babak was written in the early 70s by Nadali Hamadani. While Nafisi presents Babak as a historically grounded personage, emphasizing his political and military strategies with precise dates, locations, and interactions, Hamadani portrays Babak as a timeless, almost mythic figure, highlighting his moral courage, personal dilemmas, and symbolic role as an enduring emblem of Iranian resistance. Hamadani dramatizes Babak's inner reflections before battle, his emotional ties to followers, and heroic speeches, which are not historically documented but enhance the story's epic and inspirational quality. The image of Babak circulated widely in leftist anti-monarchist pamphlets and murals during the political turmoil before the Islamic Revolution. And after the establishment of the Islamic Republic, Babak's image continued to be the face of the protest, now across the political spectrum of various secularist forces, monarchists, communists, and Azerbaijani secessionists alike. Dissident speakers and underground musicians have been invoking him as a symbol of defiance against religious tyranny. There were even two different clandestine resistance groups called Babak Khorramdin Organization in Iran. One was active in the 90s, and second emerged on the internet around 2010, both aimed at overthrowing the Islamic government. The ideological connection and continuity between the two are unclear and unlikely based on their agendas. However, both cases, despite differences, demonstrate endurance of Babak's appeal to modern anti-clerical movements within Iran and global Iranian diaspora. Nevertheless, there were attempts by the Islamic Republic itself to counterclaim the secularist narratives and recast Babak as a uniquely Shia Islamic hero committed to the cause of Ahl al-Bayt, the Prophet's family line, against the usurping caliphs. The most recent example is the book on the title The Secret of the Red Flower, Babak Khorramdin from Another Perspective, by pro-regime historian Jafar Jamshidi Rad, published in 2018. The author relies heavily on Safavid-era legends and projects Khomeini's vision of martyrdom and so-called universal struggle against the oppression into the distant past. It's hard to say how successful these reinterpretations really are. The anti-clerical image of Babak still dominates Persian language discussions, and his name often resurfaces in viral posts on Iranian opposition platforms, not as a symbol of sectarian loyalty, but as a figure of defiance against clerical power. But he isn't always remembered in solemn tones. He also finds a place in memes and punchlines. Canadian MP Goldie Gamari, herself of Iranian heritage and a critic of the Islamic Republic, once joked that she's still single only because Babak Khorramdin died some 12 centuries before she was born. Baz Fortress, Babak's stronghold about 2,600 meters high in the mountains, commonly called Babak Castle today, remains a place of pilgrimage for the sympathizers, despite repeated attempts by the Iranian government to restrict access to the site. It is often hard to trace the motivations of the visitors, as the place is breathtakingly scenic and historically significant regardless of its political framing or understanding. Let's look now at Soviet and modern Azerbaijan. From the very dawn of the Soviet rule in the South Caucasus, Babak was appropriated as a class-conscious revolutionary. His anti-Abbasid struggle was reframed as a people's uprising against feudal and religious oppression. One of the earliest examples of this image is Jafar Jabbarli's play Bride of Fire, written and staged in 1928. Originally conceived under the title Babek, it was one of the first major historical tragedies of Azerbaijani theater. In the final version, the central figure is not Babak himself, but a fictional hero named El-Khan, an idealized young leader of the people. El-Khan embodies the revolutionary spirit attributed to Babak, while Babak hovers in the background as an inspiration and symbol. The narrative centers on El-Khan's struggle against Arab domination, framed as both a personal and national sacrifice. Through him, Jabbarli translated the Babak legend into a Soviet-era idiom of collective heroism, anti-imperial defiance, and the burning flame of revolution. The atheistic message is especially pronounced. The play culminates in the execution of El-Khan, akin to the one of Babak, where he shouts, "There is no Allah, I am Allah, the creator of my own life and the happiness on earth." In the 1970s, Enver Mehmed Khanli published his vision, in the historical novel White Hawk of the Khurramites. Unlike Jabbarli, Mehmed Khanli placed Babak himself at the center, portraying him as a charismatic, yet very much human leader, dramatizing the rebellion while keeping closer to historical sources. In 1979, on the eve of the Soviet Union's decline, Azerbaijan's cinema produced one of its most spectacular and ambitious historical epics, Babak, directed by Eldar Guliyev. The movie was loosely based on the novel by Mehmed Khanli and works of Azerbaijani historians of the time, like Ziya Bunyatov and others. Babak was the most expansive film ever produced in the Azerbaijan SSR, a collaboration between Azerbaijan Film and the giant Soviet Mosfilm studio. It gathered over 5,000 extras and 5,000 cavalrymen with costumes and props designed to recreate the world of the 9th century. The lead actor, Rasim Balaev, performed much of his own sword fighting and horseback riding, even sustaining real injuries on set, a testament to the film's obsessive attention to heroic realism. Beyond its epic battles, the film had a powerful message. In true Soviet style, it portrayed Babak not only as a national freedom fighter, but also as a proto-socialist champion of equality. It used strong color symbolism. The red of the Khurramites stood for liberation, while the black of the Abbasids represented oppression. In one of the most famous lines, Babak says to Afshin, "Either you will be destroyed under the black flag of the Caliphate, or I will fall under the red flag of our freedom." Shot across rugged landscapes in Nakhchivan and Julfa, Babak reached audiences in more than 60 countries and was watched by 35 million people in its first year alone, a staggering cultural phenomenon. Today, Babak is more than a film. It has become a symbol of Azerbaijani cultural pride and reminder of how the legend of Babak Khorramdin continues to inspire new generations. On the wave of the popularity of the movie, historian and novelist Jalal Bargushad published his own novel, Babak. It also leaned heavily into ideological interpretation, emphasizing Babak as an heir to Mazdakism and the proto-communist of a sort. Eventually, Babak became one of the central figures in the pantheon of Azerbaijani folk heroes, and he was celebrated in all forms of literature and art. In 1986, a heroic ballet titled Babak was created, portraying Babak's resistance against the Caliphate in 2 acts. Music was composed by Akshin Alizadeh. The composer himself regarded the ballet as the ultimate achievement of his life, the one he was born and living for to create, as he claimed it himself. Nowadays, in the modern Republic of Azerbaijan, Babak Khorramdin is still honored as a cultural icon. His anti-Islamic allure, so prominent during Soviet years, has been toned down a bit to balance it with the homage to Shia Islam for shaping the cultural identity of Azerbaijanis. But despite the shifts in ideological orientation, Babak was too impressive as a national hero to be abandoned. A major avenue in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, as well as multiple local streets, schools and parks are named after Babak. His name is borne by a district and its capital town Babak in Nakhchivan province. A famous statue of him stands in this town, and the larger monument has long been planned for Baku. Curiously enough, in Azerbaijan, even Babak's name carries layers of reinterpretation. His original name, rooted in Middle Persian and likely meaning beloved or little father, and perhaps deriving from revivalism of Sasanian tradition, obviously reflects his origins within the Iranian cultural world. But in modern Azerbaijani, a Turkic language, the name appears as Babak, which conveniently echoes the Turkic word bek, meaning noble or chieftain. Word bek features in countless Turkic male names, both historically and today. This linguistic overlap, though purely coincidental, adds a layer of folk etymology, allowing Babak, a 9th century Iranian rebel, to be reimagined as a distinctly Turkic hero. In this way, in popular imagination, even his name becomes part of the narrative that frames Azerbaijan's history through a Turkic lens, casting that identity deep into the region's past, long before the major Turkic migrations reshaped its cultural and linguistic landscape. Our exploration of modern Khurrami-related narratives would be incomplete without considering the role of Babak and the Khurramite story in both Kurdish and Talysh historical imagination. Syriac chroniclers of the 9th century, most notably Dionysius of Tel Mahre and Michael the Syrian, while clearly describing the Khurramites or related movements, consistently refer to them with the term Khurdanaye. This word appears to be a conflation of two distinct terms, Khurdaye, common designation of Kurds or Proto-Kurds by the speakers of Aramaic, and Khurramdiniye, an Arabic term for the Khurramites. Geographically, Dionysius places the center of the movement in the mountainous area known as Syriac sources as Bet Qardwaya, another Kurd-related denominator. Thus, we have several independent sources linking Khurramism to Kurdish identity. These historical references, taken completely outside of the Kurdish national ideologies, reinforce them, and the rebellious appeal of Babak in this context becomes handy for modern Kurdish historians and activists construing the Khurramite movement as an early precedent of Kurdish national struggle against Arab imperialism, or at least an important stage in the long journey of Kurdish self-determination. The Talysh, meanwhile, represent a different yet related strand of Khurrami memory. An Iranic people, they are linguistically close to both Persians and Kurds, but retain a distinct identity, language, and culture. Talysh traditions often claim descent from the pre-Turkic population of Azerbaijan, a view that, while simplified, is not without basis. Modern Iranologists tend to support this line, since the Talysh language is regarded as the closest living relative of Old Azeri, a well-documented Iranian language spoken in Azerbaijan until at least the 17th century. Historically, the Talysh have lived in a complex relationship with their Turkic Azerbaijani neighbors, marked by linguistic, cultural, and religious tensions. The fall of the Soviet Union and emergence of the independent Azerbaijan intensified the movement among the Talysh for self-determination and independence from the Azerbaijani Republic. It even resulted in a short secessionist conflict in 1993. Within this charged atmosphere, Talysh historians and cultural activists have increasingly claimed to be the real successors of Babak, whose story, according to them, was hijacked by the Azerbaijani establishment. Talysh enthusiasts offer their own reading of the key events, emphasize the Talysh homeland to be Babak's place of birth, and even suggest alternative places for the location of the Baz fortress. In this retelling, Babak emerges not as a shared hero of Iran or Azerbaijan, but as the emblematic ancestor of Talysh resistance and cultural survival. If this episode sparked any questions, disagreements, or reflections, I would love to hear them. You can reach me directly at echoesofheresy@gmail.com. Whether you're a scholar, seeker, skeptic, or just heretically curious, your voice is welcome here. If you enjoy learning something new about religion and philosophy, as I do, or if you have particular stories about heretics on mind, I am very much open to hear your suggestions. Perhaps your heresy of choice is already on my plans, and your advice might give the topic extra points in my priority list. Or maybe your advice would open for me completely new areas of research. Echoes of Heresy is a space for dialogue, and your thoughts help shape its future. If you enjoyed the episode, consider sharing it, rating it on your podcast app, or simply telling a friend. Word of mouth means more than algorithms ever could. If you have means and want to support the show and the research process behind it, you can find the links in the description. Now, I want to use this opportunity and thank all my listeners for your attention, support, and your engagement. I hope you stay for more stories, predictable or not, widely explored or rarely mentioned. The story of the Khurramites is not just a tale of one rebellion. It offers a window into the formation of the Islamic world itself. Their movement reflects enduring patterns still echoing today. The uneasy relationship between Persian and Arab worlds, the restless energy of Islamic heterodoxy, the pull of syncretism and nativism, and the way history is continually reshaped to serve new political and cultural narratives. Of course, not all heresy wears the face of armed revolt. In the next episode, we will meet a very different kind of dissenter. Like the Khurramites, his story is rooted in the Persian cultural sphere, shaped by the heterodox currents of Islam and marked by an ambiguous, shifting sense of identity. But his defiance was introspective, not militant, universal rather than exclusive, poetic rather than political. His rebellion took the form of silence, paradox, and dangerous honesty. Join me as we explore the life, death, and spiritual legacy of Sarmat Kashani, the naked saint of Mughal India, who defied the orthodoxies of his time and bridged Abrahamic and Dharmic vision of the divine.